All right, thanks for staying. Time for us to take a look at the dailies on Daybreak. Basically, the stories on the front pages of our newspapers this morning. We'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. The lead story there says, Education Ministry, Supreme Court, and 50 others high corruption risk. That's according to ICPC. It has the riders that says 131 MDAs fail ethics, integrity, compliance. Lottery Fund, Environment, State House among top 5. Assessment targeted at boosting transparency in government, says the Commission. You also have report shows failure of criminal justice system. That's according to experts. You'll find all the details of that story on page 4. It also has a breakdown of ICPC Ethic and Integrity Compliance Scorecard of 2022. You'd see that in the infograph just below the story there. Also, beside that, you have at the top of, or I would say rather above the lead story, elections face cancellation, postponement over insecurity. That's according to INEC. You'd find that on page 12. And then the next story there, 2 killed as Yoruba Nation agitators police clash in Lagos. All of that on page 6. Also, Nigeria records 170.2 trillion naira worth of foreign trade in 5 years. At the footnote, also, a new Nigeria possible under me. Kwankwaso, Great Campaign Council launches fundraising portal. You'd find also beside the infograph there, Yauri girls, parents resort to crowdfunding to raise 100 million naira ransom. Herbalist arrested for impregnating woman in Kano. Residents kick as FCTA moves to reintroduce Park and Pay. These are the major stories on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper, not forgetting that it's also 574 days since the 11 schoolgirls of FGC Birnin Yauri have been abducted, and also 546 days since one student of Bethel Baptist High School, Kujama, is still in captivity. These are the major stories here.
All right, next we'll take a look at the Punch newspaper. The major headline on the front page reads, Cash limits, customers protest as banks begin enforcement. Details of that can be found on page 24, and it comes with riders here that says customers say policy will affect cash-based businesses, demand fresh review, and bank ATMs dispense old notes despite CBN directive. New note scarcity persists. And well, they have pictures there of the recent clash between the Yoruba Nation protesters and, of course, the police in Lagos, and how Yoruba Nation protesters converged. 3 a.m. members killed. Details of that can be found on page 1 and 3. And then protesting police students block Ibadan roads. Governor intervenes. That is on page 14. Quite a disturbing story here. Pastor raped my daughter for 3 years. That is according to a mother. Story details of that can be found on page 4 and 5. DSS director's wife orders Kano governorship candidates arrest. And that is on page 2 of the Punch. Towards the top of the front page there, beside the nameplate, Dokwesi, UK police deepen probe. Controversy surrounds airport incidents. And that details of that can be found on page 14. At the very top of the nameplate there, scarcity. Federal government orders NNPC to reduce petrol price. And government acquires stakes in Dangote refinery. 3 others. Details on page 23. Gunmen demand 620 million naira ransom for abducted train passengers. And you can find details of that on page 2. Now, these are the major stories on the front page of the Punch newspaper.
All right. Well, Ibrahim, I would like for us to take a look at the lead story on the Daily Trust newspaper before we look at the other papers. This is scary, really, when you hear stories like this. Now, basically talking about agencies of government and ministries that are prone to corruption and also haven't demonstrated, ethics and integrity compliance, by the assessment of the ICPC. Now, some of the ministries that are found culpable in this, Ministry of Education, the Supreme Court. Now, these ministries and agencies are institutions of governments that are supposed to see to the implementation of government policies.
Exactly.
How then do we translate, policy to implementation if key institutions, key ministries, are not considered to, comply?
We always say that corruption is the bane of society. Corruption has etched deep into our culture and all that. But it's really alarming when things like this are brought to light and you see the rot that is actually in the system. When you have institutions like with Ministry of Education and the Supreme Court, indicted for having failed ethics and integrity tests. It's really disheartening because just like you said, these are institutions of government that are supposed to translate policy into government policy into true action and things that we need to see on ground so that we can have a better country. But unfortunately, if these institutions are facing this sort of rot, then it leaves a lot to be desired when you talk about translating these government policies to have the desired effect. And
worrisome really is the judiciary here. In the case of the Supreme Court,
exactly.
It is often said that the judiciary is the last hope of the common man.
Exactly.
That's a cliche now that we hear all the time. So if by this assessment, the Supreme Court is failing in that regard, then where is the hope of the common man really?
Exactly,
because,
and that is how it's supposed to be. The Supreme Court, or should I say the judiciary, should be the last hope of the common man. It should be somewhere that you know that when you go there, justice will be done and you actually get a fair hearing. And of course, you have it's impartial and you can get the decisions and in your favor if you're actually on the right side of the law. Unfortunately, if you have a situation like this, whereby an institution like that is being indicted for failing ethics and competency integrity tests, really there's a serious problem.
Yes, and it calls for a reawakening really going by this. Now also another story worrisome, the INEC now issuing raising alarm, saying that there's a tendency for the cancellation or even postponement of the election. Now this is something that we've been preparing for years, and then only for us to few days to the election, INEC is raising this alarm, and it's really worrisome. And I hope that we don't get to that point. And I hope that security agencies are doing everything within their power to make sure that we have a smooth and a heat-free election. I mean, the consequence of this will be that if we are unable to conduct this election as at when due, there's likely to be a constitutional crisis.
Of course.
And that's a problem. I mean, when you have the current administration looking to exit the office on May 29, that could be hampered if you have a postponement
or a cancellation.
A cancellation of that election. So whatever it takes to make sure that these elections happen, I think we should make it happen. In 2015, I recall a few months to the election, the previous administration of President Goodluck Jonathan, we understand based on reports that mercenaries were brought in to bring stability to some parts of the country, the northeastern part of the country, where we had, very serious threats of insurgency there. So whatever it takes really to make sure that we have these elections. I don't know the areas that pose most threats, most of the threats this time around. I know that perhaps the southeastern part of the country, where we've seen destruction of INEC facilities, by gunmen,
unknown
gunmen,
exactly.
And all that. So hopefully would see that even though INEC has given us that assurance all the time, even as they are making this statement, they are also reassuring that INEC will do whatever it needs to do.
But this is something that we have been saying for a very long time. I mean, it's something that we have been saying for a very long time. These are things that are staring us right in the face. If there's no security, if you cannot guarantee the safety of the lives of the electorate, or can't guarantee the safety or protection of election materials and election officials as well, definitely it will be difficult for elections to hold. And we've said that. We've been talking about this for a very long time. And INEC has been giving us assurances that these elections will hold. They're in tandem with the security agencies. They're putting things in motion and hoping that these things will happen. Let's just pray and hope that truly these machineries are being put in place. The security agencies are on top of the situation, and these elections can actually hold. It might not hamper the elections, the generality of the election, I mean, like in everywhere in Nigeria, but there are certain places that we know are prone to these sort of things.
Yes.
I mean, priority attention should be given to those places.
Yes, and you know, another danger is the outcome of the election overall at the end of the day, the integrity of the outcome of the election at the end of the day, because when you have delays in the pronouncements of results, you know, it creates room, you know, for all sort of things, you know, to
So I think that's why that's what the Electoral Act actually seeks to abolish. It seeks to have a situation whereby we will have a generally acceptable process that can bring in an election result that we can all believe has integrity. You understand? So that the blowback after the election will not be as much, because if people doubt the integrity of the election, that is when problems actually seems to arise. And well, it all depends on how INEC, as much as possible, tries to see that we have a seamless process. Results are transmitted on time, just like they said there's going to be electronic transmission of results in real time. We can actually get that. And if the integrity of the election itself is not called to question, then that diminishes the chances of having post-election violence and rancor at the end of the day.
True. All right, let's take a look at some of the other papers that we have this morning. We have also the Guardian newspaper this morning, where it leads with the story that says private sector frets over FG's 2.43 trillion naira non-oil revenue target. Also, the writer says experts decry increasing taxes amid widening poverty, call for plugging of revenue leakages, explore property taxes. Yusuf urges government. You also have above that lead story, 6 victims of Edo train attack rescued as police nab 2 more suspects. You have also INEC denies releasing new final list of candidates. Election riggers behind plot to remove Yakubu, IPAC alleges. 1 killed, policeman injured, vehicles burnt as police Yoruba Nation activist clash in Ojota. You also would have at the footnote, Nigeria alert amid concerns over new COVID-19 variants. NLC berates presidential candidates for supporting petrol subsidy removal. So these are the major stories on the Guardian newspaper.
All right, the next newspaper we're going to be looking at is the Daily Independent, and it carries this major story on the front page. 2023 poll may face cancellation over rising insecurity. That's just what we've discussed right now. That is according to INEC, and it disowns supposed final list of candidates for 2023 election. Now that's quite interesting coming at this time. Just like we've seen in other papers, Yoruba Nation agitators ruffled over killing of member. Condemn security agencies, asks international community to intervene, and they vow to intensify efforts on Yoruba Nation agitation. And towards at the very side of the front page there, Port Harcourt Refinery commences operations in Q1 of 2023. That is according to Silva, and he says petroleum price needs to be market driven. Gunmen abduct Edo Customary Court president and ex-lawmaker. That is on page 8 of the Daily Independent. And Edo train kidnapped, 6 persons freed as search team doubles rescue efforts. That is also on page 6. Talking about politics now, Tinubu Akpabio expresses concern over treacherous APC members. And another story here that says Ibra leaders flay Ohinoi over allegedly disrespecting Buhari Bello. And at the very top of the front page there, 89 trillion naira stamp duty charges. CSOs back down on calls for Emefiele's sack and arrest. Say earlier calls for sack prosecution based on falsehood. And with 4 months to go, I hope to retire in peace, says Buhari. Now, these are the major stories on the front page of the Daily Independent newspaper.
All right, now on the Nigerian Tribune this morning, we have the lead story talk about security threat to next election real, says INEC, says commission leaving nothing to chance. So virtually all the papers are taking this story. Fuel importation to end by 2024, according to the federal government. 60,000 barrels per day, Port Harcourt refinery to commence in the first quarter. FG claims 80% equity in modular refineries. New Naira notes now in ATM as cash withdrawal limit takes off. You'd also find one killed as Yoruba Nation agitators police clash in Lagos. Gunmen kidnap customary court president in Edo. 6 train kidnap victims rescued. Abductors of passengers demand 620 million naira. Well, just when we thought that we've gone past this, and it happens again. Yeah. And you know, the sad thing about the Edo incident is that it happened while they were at the station.
Exactly.
They were not.
It was not the train that was attacked. It was actually the station. Yes.
You know, so you know, you kind of wonder. I mean, if the train has left the station with them in the train, that would be different. Perhaps maybe the Abuja Kaduna scenario. But this time around, they went into
the station itself.
The station itself where passengers were and abducted
them.
You know, people there. And I'm wondering, are the stations secured? Is there any presence of security personnel in the stations at all?
Well, there should be. That is the thing. There should be a presence of security operatives. I know for sure when you were on the Abuja Kaduna route, I mean, these stations are a bit more fortified now than they used to be. But the thing is, was it a situation of us, taking our eye off the ball because it was Kaduna Abuja that was attacked, so let's focus on Kaduna Abuja and we left all the others.
Leave the others.
Exactly. So I think maybe that was the situation that actually occurred then, and because if a moving train can actually can be a target for this, why not a stationary station? I mean, like it's easier when you look at it.
To even deploy more troops.
Exactly, it's easier. I think it's easier to protect than a moving train. So these are things that we really need to look at, and it all revolves around the lack of proactivity.
And it doesn't show really that lessons have been learned in this instance. And also, there's a likelihood of the fact that even if we had security presence in those stations, they are probably not enough to stop what happened from happening. So it's a case of maybe a similar scenario with the Kuje prisons as well.
Exactly, because
we also had security personnel stationed there.
But there was no resistance. There was no resistance whatsoever. Because if you look at, if you listen to the reports coming out from Edo, coming out from the station, there was no gun battle. They were not engaged. They didn't engage anybody. They just went in there, picked up whoever they wanted to pick up, and left. There was no resistance whatsoever. So it's just like the Kuje situation, whereby they went in there, they broke into the prison, took whoever they wanted to take, and at the end of the day, there was no resistance whatsoever. So even if there was presence of security operatives, it definitely was ineffective because it didn't actually stop anything from happening. So it really speaks to the lack of proactiveness that we have as when we don't act on intelligence that we receive, we don't safeguard against these things happening. Is when they happen, that is when we'll start running from pillar to post, trying to mount rescue. We're always talking about search and rescue or search and recover. We're not talking about how we can be able to stop these things from happening, and that is where we need to start going.
And now it appears that the abductors are demanding 620 million naira for the 6 train kidnap. I mean, 6 persons kidnapped now in that incident. So it remains to be seen, really, what happens.
But not to belabor the bad news. I mean, like some of the victims have been rescued.
And some arrests have been made as well.
Exactly.
2 people have been arrested in connection to that. Well, what happens, I think the point that we are trying to make is that what happens after the abduction is not as important as what we do before it happens.
Exactly.
I think what is more important is the proactiveness, is steps that we put in place to make sure that these things don't happen,
to stop these
as
things
much
from
as
happening.
possible.
Exactly. When we try to stop these things from happening, I think it's the best for everybody.
All right, let's take a look at some of the other papers.
Yes, let's take a look at the papers that we have. We have a First News newspaper, and it carries this major story on the front page. Insecurity may stall 2023 general elections. INEC cries out. Now, that's something that we've just discussed right now. And it comes with riders here that says polls may face serious threat of cancellation if insecurity escalates. INEC chair assures commission won't leave anything to chance in ensuring adequate election personnel materials, and of course it denies releasing final lists of candidates, warned political parties and others. Still talking security, 1 killed, 2 officers shot as Yoruba Nation agitators, police clash in Lagos, many others also injured, vehicles burnt. 13.1 billion naira bid for forfeited Banana Island property fails, says EFCC. And talking about the Edo train attack now, security agencies rescue 6 more victims, which is something that we have seen in other papers and, of course, discussed right here as well. Obi will take office as president of Nigeria in 2023, and that's according to Ezefe. Airtel completes deal for acquisition of 4G, 5G spectrum at $316.7 million. And towards the top of the front page there, we can find the story, 3 years in the saddle, Diri to inaugurate historic Sagbama Ekeremo Road 40 years after completion. Now, that is quite interesting. Buhari campaigns for Tinubu in Adamawa, says Jagaban of Borgu can be trusted. And talking about health situation now, COVID-19, 64 million Nigerians fully vaccinated. And that is something to be proud about. These are the major stories on the front page of the First News newspaper this morning.
All right, now let's take a look at the Nation newspaper, where you have the lead story there. It says, why Nigerians should vote Tinubu Shetima by Buhari. You also would find kidnappers demand 620 million naira for 31 victims of Edo train attack. Made in Nigeria helicopter for inauguration before May 29. Silver 6 CBN's special fund for modular refineries. Airtel Nigeria announces acquisition of 5G spectrum. Withdrawal policy pushes up POS transaction charges. You also have polls threatened, INEC warns. So these are the major stories on the Nation newspaper.
All right, well, still talking the headlines now. We'll take a look at the Vanguard newspaper, and it's in keeping with what we have seen so far. Insecurity polls may be postponed, cancelled. That is according to INEC. Insists no going back on BVAS, and real-time polling unit results will be uploaded. INEC must manage security threats. That is according to IFES. That is this major story on the front page of the Vanguard newspaper, and details of that can be found on page 5. DSS sued for arresting activists protesting bid to arrest Emefiele. And query, prominent Ibera leaders side with Koigi government. At the very bottom of the front page there, cash withdrawal, long queues in banks as implementation commences, and power generation drops by 7.6%. That is another story on the front page of the Vanguard. So talking about health now, COVID-19, fresh concerns as new Kraken variant emerges. And in sports, 2030 World Cup, Ronaldo to earn 200 million to promote Saudi's joint bid. Now, these are the major stories on the front page of the Vanguard newspaper this morning.
All right. Well, quite a lot of stories, but I think we've taken as much as we can take. But I'd like for us to talk about this story before we move on. Residents kick as FCTA moves to reintroduce park and pay in Abuja. So it basically means that for you to park your vehicle along maybe by the roadside, you will now have to be you will have to be charged to pay some amount of money. I'm wondering how this will play out. A lot of residents are already criticizing that move. I recall that back in 2014, there was a controversy that ensued as a result of this, even leading to a court injunction that stopped this from happening. And now we are seeing that it's going to be reintroduced. Well, I don't know how residents are going to be receiving this at a time like this.
The thing is, you don't introduce a policy without giving people alternatives. If people do not have where to park their cars, then they will have to park it by the roadside. If you have designated parking spaces that are available, that people can have access to, then you can actually say, okay, if you park in the wrong place, then you will have to charge you for doing this. But we don't have designated parking lots. The ones that we have are actually not enough to cater for the vehicles that we have on the road. So definitely that's where you have to see this pushback. And the pushback is also coming with the situation whereby we all know the economy, how the economy is right now. Things are tight. You understand? So I mean, putting these kind of levies on people also brings the daggers will be drawn,
really?
and definitely there will be some serious pushback. So I think sometimes when we bring in policies, we put the cart before the horse. We should try to make provisions for alternative parking first before we say if you park here you'll get charged.
All right, then we'll see how all that will play out. We'll continue to bring you all the updates. This is much we can take. We'll take a short breather now, and then when we return, we'll continue with the show. Join us again at the top of the hour.
But in a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that